Here we go, part 3. Talking about Texas and how it becomes its own independent country and then part of the United States. What happens in 1821, well, back up even before 1821, Mexico gets its independence from Spain. And now Mexico has all this land because the Mexican border went all the way up to Oklahoma and everything and all the way over to California at this time. Now Mexico has all this extra land and it's needing money because it just fought a war and set itself free from Spain. So Mexico agrees to sell a whole bunch of land cheap to encourage settlers to come there, and they're trying to get people to come there. Well, in 1821, that's when Moses Austin finds out about the fact that Texas is selling all this, Mexico is selling all this land in Texas cheap. And so he talks to the Mexican government and wants to buy a huge tract of land from them. He then is able to talk to several families back in Tennessee, back in North, other places, and get them to want to move out there with him for cheap land. There are 297 families that originally decide to head to Texas. They refer to them as the Old 300. They were 3 families shy of 300, but that's the nickname that comes with it. Still to this day in Texas, that is a sense of pride if you are one of the Austins or you were one of the, the original 300 families that came there. Mexico says they will agree to these other citizens coming with Moses Austin, but they have to do several things. They can only bring moral settlers. I understand if you own your own country and people are coming in, that you want the top notch coming in, and they only want moral settlers. They also, all the Texas people moving to Texas had to promise to join the Catholic Church. That is a promise they do not keep, even though they do promise at that point, and they have to promise to become Mexican citizens. Now, they do become Mexican citizens, but they never really learn to speak Spanish or anything like that. It's just more in namesake. And so in 1821, then, these families start to head out there. And then by 1830, you have 25,000 Texans living in that area from America, and you only have 4,000 Mexicans living in that area. I mean, it is a crazy number more than they should have. The people from Mexico, you're in Mexico, they felt resentment against these people and everything. They did not like them. Them being there, they wanted them gone. And in 1830, when Mexico outlawed slavery, this is going to cause a problem because a lot of the people who had moved to Texas had brought slaves with them because it was good land for cotton farming. So they called the Native Americans living there the Tejanos, and they resented these new Americans showing up there. And now they start to show up illegally. They're just coming in, and once again, it's past the 300 families. It is now this massive movement. So Mexico decides to close Texas to immigration, and they actually send troops to guard the border so that no Americans are crossing into Mexico. At this point, Stephen Austin, which is Moses Austin's son, he feels that he needs to go talk to Mexico to see if he can resolve the problem and set it up to where we don't have any, strife anymore. He goes down to Mexico to talk to them. When he gets there, Santa Anna and them ain't playing any of it. They just throw him in jail. They're not going to listen to him try and explain how to work this out and everything like this. And Stephen Austin is the one saying, let's work this out. You have people like William Travis, who is calling for a rebellion at this point. He wants to go against Mexico and start a war. Stephen Austin is going to spend 5 years in jail and then finally is released. And when he comes back, the man that was the calming voice for not going to war with Mexico now is quite upset that he's just spent 5 years in a Mexican jail and everything over no charges other than the fact of wanting to talk to Mexico about it. And so what happens then is William Travis and 180 Texans, they go down to a place called the Alamo to stop the Mexican army from coming across the border and everything, even though it is technically Mexico's land and everything. When William Travis and the 180 Texans get down there, they go to a little Spanish mission. It's a church. The Alamo isn't a car rental company, and it isn't a movie theater thing. It is a church, is all it is. And they go to the church because in this day and age, a church in that area would have walls, because the churches were not only built as a place of worship, they were also built as a place of fortification during the times that the Native Americans or other people will be attacking. And so the church has walls. And in fact, the church, some of the walls were knocked down at this time. Other famous people go with him. David Crockett, you all know him as the guy from Tennessee, the show about him. Jim Bowie goes with him. You've heard of a Bowie knife. That's where it gets the name. Jim Bowie was famous for taking this big, long knife, and when he would get into fights with people, he would take that knife, throw it into the ground in between them, and say, first person that gets it gets to use it. He was actually pretty smart because everybody would try and jump for the big knife, and that's when he would hit them, and then he would pick up the knife and he would gut them. So he was quite famous for having a lot of fights with a knife. These are all the famous people that are flocking to the Alamo to defend Texas from Mexico, even though Texas is part of Mexico at this point. There is a picture right there of the Alamo Church. That's as it stands today. It is right next to the border with Mexico, which makes it a place you can see where they would want to go. So, here we go. There you go. On the left is Jim Bowie, and on the right is David Crockett. And as you notice, we already talked about way back when we did early on with the Explorers, David Crockett did not wear a coonskin cap. He couldn't stand them at all. Thought they were crude. That is what he looked like right there. It's not the picture of the guy in the buckskin that we picture, but that is a real picture of him. So what happens at the Alamo? Santa Anna shows up, and he shows up with a massive 5,000-person army ready to take on Texas. Texas, once again, has 180 people at a church. When they get there, Santa Anna assembles his troops. He decides that he wants to go ahead and offer terms of surrender. He sends some people in. They ask them, how do you guys want to surrender? They say no. And as the people are reporting back to Santa Anna, inside the Alamo, they raise a black flag. You all know what a white flag is. You know of truce. A black flag means, you see it from pirate ships and everything, it means no mercy, meaning we're not going to show you any mercy whatsoever. This is as American as it gets. You're outnumbered 180 to 5,000, and you look at them and say, we're not showing you any mercy. You gotta love the backbone of the people at the Alamo, or just the outright stupidity of them for trying to anger them on and bring them on. But when Santa Anna sees this, he is irate, and Santa Anna starts to attack the Alamo every day, and they are able to hold off for 12 days of 5,000 people attacking, trying to get through this one hole in the wall. The guys stand there shooting, and then the Mexican army has to leave, come back the next day, and they can't get through. 12 days of them not able to get through. And on the last day, what happens is the Mexican army launches an attack. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning. It's still dark. You can't see who's attacking, and so now any advantage the American has is lost. It'll be right up to the wall. When they try to break through the wall, it breaks down into hand-to-hand combat, punching, kicking, biting type things. And the Americans, 180, a whole lot less now because of people being wounded during this time, are able to hang on for 90 minutes in a hand-to-hand combat fight. I can't imagine that. If you've ever boxed or messed around like that, you go a few minutes and you're so winded you can't even stand up, to actually go a 90-minute fist fight just to hang on. And they held on. And at that point, the Mexican army is able to bust through the wall and they take the Alamo. They go bed to bed to the people that are sick and kill them. They actually capture David Crockett, bring him outside, and Santa Anna personally executes him. We know this. There was a woman and a small child that were hiding at that time. And so we talk about no survivors. There were no male survivors, but we do know what happened because of a lady that was hiding in there and was left to be. So now that you've had the Alamo, which was not going to be their last stand, the whole point of the Alamo was to slow up the Mexican army so that they can get together. Not William Travis, what his name is? Stephen Austin can get together everybody and form an army. And now Santa Anna is coming forward. And what Sam Houston does is he keeps retreating backwards with his army. And Santa Anna would get close to him, ready for battle, and they would back up. Santa Anna would chase him down, get close to him, ready for battle, and back up. What they were doing, Sam Houston was doing with this time, is letting Santa Anna outpace his supplies. What happens is he gets more than a day in front of his supply wagons, which has your extra gunpowder, which has your food, which has your extra cannons, things like that. Santa Anna has outpaced his supplies. And then what happens is Sam Houston gets his army and they line up. Santa Anna finally catches them at nighttime. They realize, oh my goodness, they're not retreating. We're in for a battle. And so what happens then is all night long, Sam Houston would send one or two people over. They would shoot into the camp and then they would flee. And what would happen then is the Mexican army was up all night long, worried that they were going to be attacked. None of the soldiers are getting any sleep all night long. And there's this constant sense of worry that's going on. Well, basically, everybody in the Mexican army stayed up all night while Sam Houston is letting his guys sleep and rest up. When dawn breaks, Sam Houston would line his guys up like they're going to fight, and then he would move them all back. And he would change it up again and move them all up. They're going to line up. They're going to attack, and then they would fall back again. He does this all day long until it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And when it gets to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Mexican army is tired of watching this. They've been anticipating. They marched for a whole day, stayed up all night. Now it's 2 o'clock into the next day. They are war slap out. And what happens at that time is the Mexican army decides to take naps and to lay down. And they go in, they take naps, and we wait for them to start taking naps, and that's exactly when we attack, when they thought we had given up and weren't going to attack. A lot of the Mexican soldiers are shot in their beds and everything, and in fact, Santa Anna was in the middle of a nap. And what we didn't know about Santa Anna at that time is Santa Anna, in his struggle with getting Mexico its independence, had lost his leg. He now had a wooden leg. Santa Anna is woken by his men. They realize they're being overran. They wake Santa Anna, just put him on his horse, smack the horse, and the horse takes off. He didn't put his leg on. And so what happens is, as a guy from Indiana that is fighting with the troops from Texas, he is the first into Santa Anna's tent and sees this leg laying there, and like any good redneck, that's a great souvenir. And so he stole Santa Anna's leg. The man keeps it the whole rest of the time he's there and takes it back to Indiana with him. Interesting story is he donates it to a museum in Indiana. And since then, the greatest hero of Mexico, his leg has been in Indiana. Since the 1840s and everything, when all this happened, Mexico has probably asked 25, 30 times. They asked politely, can we have his leg back? And each time the state of Indiana has told them no. And so if you want to see actually Santa Anna's leg from this battle, don't go to Mexico, don't go to Texas, go to Indiana, which is quite an interesting little story about this with that. So there on your left is Sam Houston, and on the right is General Santa Anna. It's a waist-up shot because dude's got a wooden leg. All right, so There is a picture of the Battle of San Jacinto, and you see the fighting is going right into the tents and everything, and you see the monument there on the right. April 1836, Texas now has won its independence. From 1836 to 1845, Texas is its own country. That's why Texas on its flag has one star. What does a star stand for? On the flags, it stands for each individual state, and at one point they were the only state in their country. They are the Lone Star State, and that's why it has a star on their flag. Interesting fact, Texas is the only state. Also, all states, if you fly the state flag and the American flag, there has to be just a little discrepancy where the American flag is a little higher. Texas says you can fly the Texas flag and the American flag at the same height in that state. This is also where you get the whole Six Flags thing. If you go to Atlanta, there's it's a amusement park called Six Flags. It started in Texas. Why is it called Six Flags? Because Texas has had Six Flags fly over in history. It was owned by the French, it was owned by the Spanish, it was owned by Mexico, it was owned by Spain, it was owned by the United States, and it was owned by Texas. And so it gets Six Flags have flown over, and that's why it's called that. Texas statehood. What happened is the North is opposing Texas becoming a state at that time, mainly because they allowed slavery. And as we're going to talk about in the next chapter and everything, it's that whole tipping point. But you're going to have a president named James Polk. He is going to be from Tennessee. He is going to run on a platform of manifest destiny. Go back to the very beginning of the chapter. It is the belief that we should expand from coast to coast. And so when Texas applies for statehood, it's Henry Clay who actually blocks it. We've talked about Henry Clay several times. He is the one who stops them from joining because of upsetting the balance. So Polk runs on the fact of making Texas the 28th state. He is going to run completely on the fact of manifest destiny. At that time also, Oregon is fertile farmland. Like I said, the settlers had poured in after Jedediah Smith found the South Pass. And while James K. Polk is running for president at this time, actually going to be running for vice president and going to go all the way to president with us. Because of this, he runs on the phrase, all of Oregon or none. Why would you say all of Oregon or none? Oregon territory at this time is not just the 49th parallel. It extends all the way up to the 54th parallel, which is about halfway through Canada. And so James K. Polk is literally running on the fact of, we're going to go to war with England so that we get more of land out there. He literally wants it to go coast to coast, and pretty much pole to pole is the way they're viewing it at this time and everything like that. So there is, you can see what's more of the trails. Polk tells England then at that time, he says, listen, we're going to have the 54, 40, or fight. Our land is going to extend all the way to the 54th parallel, 40th, or we're going to go to war. At this time, though, we declare war on Mexico. And so we end up signing a peace treaty with England. The last thing America wants, when we barely won the Revolutionary War, we barely won the War of 1812, the last thing we want is to fight England one more time. So at this point, we declare with England that the 49th parallel is our parallel to the north. Polk is able to add throughout all of this 12 parts of 12 more states while he is president. All right, to explain what happens with the Mexican War, Polk sends an official down to want to buy California and New Mexico from Mexico. Mexico says no, and the relationship starts to sour at that point. So the border being in dispute of Texas and Mexico, Mexico sends some troops up to guard the border. The problem was, at this time, Mexico, because we were bordered by a river, Mexico thought the border was the Nueces River. America thought the border was the Rio Grande. And so America sends troops down to guard its border. Mexico sends troops to guard its border. The problem being there's this little square, like 12 miles, that is the Rio Grande here and the Nueces here. And what happens is that's where the two armies pass each other. And so if you were from Mexico, you look at this situation and see, we've been invaded. If you're from America and you think the Rio Grande is the border, you look at this situation and say, we've been invaded. Both countries, in fact, if you go to both textbooks and everything, the American textbook says we were invaded and we were defending our area, and Mexican history books will say that they were invaded and they were defending their area. So they fire on the Americans and they kill 16 of them at the Rio Grande. So Polk then has Congress declare war on Mexico. He sends General Stephen Kearny out to take New Mexico, and they are led by the explorer John Fremont. Why would they be led by him? Well, once again, he is the map maker for that area, and so he knows the area. They go all the way out. Then there's some that go to California, and they see the Mexican army out there. There is a battle that happens, and the Americans win out in California. Now, this is the interesting part. The Americans that won in California did not have an American flag with them to raise and say, hey, we just took a Mexican fort. So what they did was they took a white bed sheet and took some blackberry juice, squished it together, and they drew a bear on a flag because they thought the bear looked powerful and strong and protected. And what happens then is that becomes California's state flag, is a white flag with a bear drawn on it. It's a little bit better than blackberry juice today, but that's originally where it comes from. And so what happens is you have the two most opposite generals in the world. You have General Zachary Taylor. He is going to be called Old Rough and Ready. He was constantly dirty. He had, crust on his clothes, was most of the time didn't even wear a general's uniform, and everybody called him Rough and Ready. He's just tough. He takes 6,000 troops and he invades Mexico. Santa Anna is going to come north with 20,000 troops. Rough and Ready runs into Santa Anna, and there is a 2-day battle at Buena Vista. We call it an American victory. Both armies are so cut to pieces. So many people died. Santa Anna, the only reason it's American victory, he begins limping back towards Mexico City, while Rough and Ready, then Zachary Taylor, begins to pursue him. But what has happened during this time is General Winfield Scott has gone by boat south of Mexico City and has launched his army there, marching north to Mexico City, while Rough and Ready is coming south towards Mexico City. Santa Anna is pinched in between. Winfield Scott was called Old Fuss and Feathers. So you had Rough and Ready and Fuss and Feathers. Fuss and Feathers took hours in the morning to get himself looking right and everything. Didn't matter, white gloves, feathers in the hat, the whole time thing. Could not have been more opposite, but have the same thing happen. And at the last battle is where you get a thing in Mexican history called the Boy Heroes. When Santa Anna's army realizes they're going to lose and Santa Anna says we need to surrender and everything, there was a group of 6 young boys who decided they would rather die in freedom than actually surrender. And so they just jumped up and ran straight towards the other army. And there was nothing the Americans could do but shoot and kill them. And so they still talk about those niños heroes, those boy heroes from the Mexican-American War. So you can see the battles right there. There's where the Alamo, San Jacinto, and there's where now we have the Texas border. There's going through this thing I just mentioned to you. But the Mexico, when they surrendered and signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and Mexico at this time gives up half of its land to us. When they do this, it gives us the states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. America, in exchange, because Mexico had just won its independence, had just fought this war, in exchange for all this land, we gave them $15 million. We took it. We were going to take it. At least we gave them something for it at that point. America, though, agrees to something called they protect the citizens or the people that were already living in that Mexican territory, because at that time Arizona was land by Mexico, and if there were Mexican citizens living there, and we agreed to let them stay because they had staked out a homestead, and to protect them and not let them be taken advantage of by living there. So America does its part in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to try and keep the relations. The last thing we've got to talk about real quick, there you go, there is Rough and Ready and Fuss and Feathers, and you can really see a difference in them. The Gadsden Purchase. This brings us to the end right here of everything of what's going on in this chapter. Finally is going to finalize our borders from east to west, north to south. The last thing that happens is we are looking for a good railroad route to go all the way out west, because once again it takes 6 months to travel from St. Louis all the way to California. And there's a man named James Gadsden who knows that the bottom of Arizona and New Mexico is flat land. And if we can buy that land and run a railroad that way, we could go across and then down around the Rockies and then up into there. And so we talk with Mexico, and for $10 million, we gave them $15 million for all we got before, but for a little strip of land, we're going to give them $10 million so that we can find a railroad route to California. This is the final act of finalizing our southern border. And so now we go from the 49th parallel, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and to the Rio Grande, and to the Gadsden Purchase. America is finally in its borders, and now we are about to finally get into war. And we're going to be talking about that in the next week's sessions and everything. Really enjoying this time with y'all. Have a good one.